Hi, welcome back to My Smart Learning. This is a lesson for Year 12s. It's your next A-level biology lesson. If you're a GCSE student, you don't need to watch it unless you are doing GCSE biology. Then it may be very useful to you to watch this video because then you get a sort of a heads up of what's coming up next year for you. So, what are we looking at today? Diversity index. Our learning objective, how diverse is the population? Well, what does the word diverse mean? It basically means how different is it, diversity, how different is it in the population. So how do we measure that? That's what we're looking at. But before we start, we need our quick recall PT, our quick high five quiz. So remember, you get all 5 right, you get a virtual high five from me. Very sought after, everybody's wanting them. So 1 to 5, write these down, press pause at the end, check your answers, make sure you got thorough answers to them, and I'm going to go through the answers straight after you've unpaused it. So number 1, the system of grouping organisms is known as, and that was what we did last lesson. Number 2, each group, okay, remember each group is known as. What are the groups in order of hierarchy? So what do we call those groups in order of hierarchy? What are the 2 types of this type of grouping, and which one shows evolutionary relationships? So that's your 5 questions. Write those down, pause the video, check them, and if you've unpaused it now, let's go through the answers. Right, so system of grouping organisms is known as classification. Each group is known as a taxa. Remember we said the line, the taxa, one group is called a taxon. The study of this is called taxonomy. What are the groups in order of hierarchy? Now how do you remember it? Delicious king prawn curry or fat greasy sausages. So delicious, D is domain, king, kingdom, prawn, phylum, curry, class, or order, fat, family, that doesn't sound right, fat family, genus, which is the greasy, sausages, species. Okay, so that's the order. What are the 2 types of this grouping called? So you've got artificial classification and phylogenetic classification. Artificial is just based on the features. Do they have wings? Do they fly? They must all be in the same group. Whereas the evolutionary one is your phylogenetic one, the phylogeny. Number 5, which one shows evolutionary, is phylogenetic classification. Because then you're looking at the evolutionary relationship between them. For instance, the whale's flippers, human hand, horse's foot. So what we're looking at today, what do I need to know? What is species diversity, and how can I calculate this by using a diversity index used as a measure of species diversity? How do you use it? How do I use that calculation? So you need your calculators for this lesson. It's not very complicated maths, it's just loads of numbers. So you can't do it in your head, you will need a calculator. So if you need to pause now and run off and get yourself a calculator, please do. Press pause and come back. Welcome back if you've unpaused it. So, biodiversity, what does this word mean? Biodiversity. Bio meaning living things, obviously you know that because you're studying biology, and if you didn't, you need to go and find yourself another course right now. Bio meaning living thing, diversity means differences. So it's all about the number and variety of living organisms in the world, in the entire world. But also you can just say in a particular ecosystem, okay? But we are looking at the whole world. What does it depend on? What does biodiversity depend on? Well, it depends on species diversity. It depends on genetic diversity, and it depends on your ecosystem diversity. What do I mean by species diversity? Well, species diversity is the number of different species and the number of individuals of each of those species within a community. You need to learn these definitions. They're very important. They're in bold in your textbook, and you do get questions like this in the exam where you have to give a definition of these particular words. Okay? And I put the word community in red because community is a very important word. So in a community, like I said, for a community in Handsworth, for instance, or Handsworth Wood, if you look around the community, there's all sorts of different types of people. Okay, so when we're talking about the human population, a community like Handsworth, for instance, has got different races of people from different parts of the world, from all around. And it's a very diverse community, Handsworth. You've got people from all sorts of corners of the world, and obviously there might be more of one particular group of people compared to the other, but it is one big melting pot. If you go to other communities in part of the UK, it might be just one particular group of people. Okay, so that's what species diversity is. If you imagine in a community, is in a particular ecosystem, it'll be all the different plants in that ecosystem, all the different insects in that ecosystem, all the different amphibians and mammals in that ecosystem. Okay, so that's what community is. And species diversity is all of the different species and all the numbers of those individuals in that particular community. Genetic diversity then it's the gene pool, isn't it? We've looked at genetic diversity already in the last week's lessons. It's all of the genes that are possessed by all of the individuals in one particular species. So if you imagine if you're in a pond and there's a small ecosystem there and there's some frogs there, or a particular type of frog, a particular species of frog, you're wanting to find out all the different genes, what are the variety of genes in that particular frog species. Okay, so it's all the different alleles and all the genes possessed within there. An ecosystem diversity is a range of habitats within that area. So obviously you know what the word habitat is. I've highlighted it in red. It's a place where an organism lives. It's also its kind of niche. How does it fit within that ecosystem? What's its function? What's its purpose in that ecosystem? What's its job there? Okay, so habitats are all part of that. So species diversity. There's two parts of this. This is what we're focusing on today. We're going to be calculating the species diversity index. To work it out, you need to know two things. You need to know the number of the individual, or the number of different species you've got in a particular area. So for instance, here in this area, I've got 25 species in a meadow and 25 different species in a field of wheat. So you've got a meadow and a field of wheat. And there's 25 species over there and there's 25 species over there. So that's the number you need. You also need to know the proportion of that. So for instance, in that community made up of the individual species, for instance, if you got 25 species equally abundant in the meadow, so let's say you're 25 species in the meadow and there's of those 25 species, for each of those species there's 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50 of each of those individuals. They're equally abundant. There's roughly equal numbers of them, or lots of them. Okay. But whereas if you got the wheat field, and in the wheat field 95% of those 25 species are just that single species of wheat, that means the other 5% of those 25 species, which might be just I can't even do the maths in my head now. It's 1 over 5, that's 1/20th, right? So 1/20th of that, 1/10 is 2.5, so it's like one species, right? So one species is not the wheat, it's something else. So that doesn't make it very diverse, okay? So the meadow is a lot more diverse, it's got a greater species diversity, whereas the wheat field, even though it's also got 25 different species, the 95% of all of the numbers are actually just that one species. So the other 24, there must only be a few of them, very, very few numbers. So, why is species diversity important? Well, the more species you have and the more in the population you have of those species, they're abundant of each of those individual species, the more diversity you have. And therefore the environment and that ecosystem is going to be more stable. Why? It's to do with the potential for extinction, okay? If you've got, let's say, that wheat field and you get a really bad winter or drought or something like that, not winter, but let's say you got a drought or a disease comes along, it can wipe out that entire field. That ecosystem is not very stable. It's very susceptible to becoming completely wiped out and barren. Whereas if you've got lots and lots of different species in that field, then there's a chance that something can come along like a disease and it can wipe out, let's say, 20% of the species, but the other 80% survive, and then they've got a chance to successfully carry on breeding. So by having species diversity on Earth, you're giving the chance for life to flourish and continue on and on and on and on, okay? And that's why humans need to interact with our environment in a very safe way, which is what our next lesson is all about, human impact on the ecosystem. So, how does biodiversity reflect how well an ecosystem functions? That's what it does. So the more diverse, the more species diversity you have, you know how well that ecosystem is functioning. The higher the species diversity, that little D represents species diversity. The more higher the D, the more stable the ecosystem, the less it will be affected by things like climate change. For example, we said drought. If you've got high D, high diversity index, then at least one of those species might be able to survive in that community and can tolerate the drought or the lack of water, which means there's something that survived, and therefore it can carry on living in that particular community, and that community can thrive again eventually after, you know, the population starts to grow again. Harsh conditions, for example, a hot desert might have a low species diversity. There's fewer organisms are adapted. This will be an unstable ecosystem. It's dominated by the climate factor. So if it's really, really hot and dry, there's only certain organisms, those xerophytes that we talked about before, can survive there. But if there's only a few of them about and they get wiped out because there's likely no water or something like that, then it can cause complete extinction in that particular ecosystem. That ecosystem completely gets wiped out and it becomes a complete desert. Nothing lives there at all. So how do I calculate species diversity? This is where you need your calculators. Calculators at the ready. Species diversity index is the calculation, little d, and it ranges from 0 to 1. And the higher the value, the lower the diversity. Okay? The higher the value, the lower the diversity. So you want a high species diversity index. So what do those numbers mean? So you've got the little d is your diversity index. The capital N is the total number of organisms of all species. The total number of organisms of all the species. The little n over there is the number of organisms of each species. And the little e shape there is a Greek letter, it's a capital sigma. It represents the sum of, you're adding them all up. So what you want, let's say you got 50 different organisms. So you do 50, then you times it by 50, take away 1. So that'll be 50 times 49 for that bit there. This bit, the sum of, this bit you need to go through every single organism in all the different species. For each one, how many are there? And then multiply it by one less than that. So let's say there's 50 of them, then that'll be 49. That'll be 50 times 49. But you do it for each individual number of the species, and then you add them all up, and then you just divide it. So as simple as that. So that's the equation then. So it's capital N bracket n minus 1, and then it's over sigma n little n bracket little n minus 1. Got your diversity index, total number of organisms of all species, total number of organisms of each species, and the sigma is the sum of. The higher the value of D, the greater the diversity. There's something wrong with my slide. I'm going to have to amend this very quickly, because I noticed there was something wrong with that slide. The higher the value, the higher the diversity, because it's an index. So that's small. Because you want it to be higher. So here's a worked example. You've got a field, and this is the one that you should be able to find in your books. Bear with me a second. And while I'm at it, that one there. So you've got, here is a field, and in this field you've got two areas, you've got X and Y. So habitat X and habitat Y. So you've got these species, A, B, C, D, E, different species. We can call them anything you want. Let's say some flowers. So you can say rose, buttercup, dandelion, daisy, and another flower. So lily. So tulips. So you got all these different flowers. Now this is area X, this is area Y. Now you've got to count how many of these A have you got? Well, I've got 10 of those, I've got 10 of those, got 10 of those, 10 of those, 10 of those. These are equally abundant. Okay, there's lots of them all. Whereas in my area Y, let's say roses, I've only got 3. For B, I've got 5. For C, I've got 2, and so on. But D, look, I've got loads of more abundant 30 Ds, daffodils, right? 36. Okay, so they're not evenly distributed, whereas these guys are more evenly abundant, evenly distributed. So, but the thing is, how many species have I got? I've got what, A, B, C, D, E? I've got 5. How many for this one? I've also got the same 5 species. But what's the total number of individuals? Well, if I add those up, 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10, it's 50. If I add all of those up, I also get 50. So looking at those two numbers, they look like they're exactly the same. So maybe I should get the same answer. Maybe I'll get the same diversity index. Well, if we plug those numbers into our calculation, so this is my area X, this is my area Y. Remember what we do? We do, this is your n number, your little n, but you need to multiply it by 1 less than n. So that would be 10, take away 1, which is 9, which is 10 times 9. So you do 10 times 9, which is 90. Now obviously all those numbers are the same, so you do them every time. 10 times 9, 10 times 9, 10 times 9, 10 times 9, 10 times 9. So these 5 90s, and then the bottom bit is sigma, you add them all up. So if you add them all up, you get 450. Do the same thing for these guys here, but remember it's the n number times by 1 less than it, so it'll be 3 times 2, 5 times 4, 2 times 1, 36 times 35, 4 times 3. So you do that, and you've got your total numbers there. You add them all up, and you get that. So now if you've noticed, the bottom of my equation have got 2 different numbers, because the top of my equation is going to be exactly the same, because the top of my number is going to be 50 times 49. So here's my area X. At the top of my equation, remember, is capital N bracket capital N minus 1. So that's 50 times 49, because remember there's 50 of those in total, which gives you 2450. But remember the bottom of this equation, I've got 450, so I divide it by 450, I get 5.44. In habitat Y, my D, again, I've got 50 in total. Remember, I had 50 total organisms, so I do 50 times 1 less than it, which is 49. I divide it by the bottom, which is 1,300, because I did the sum of. I do that, 2450 divided by 1300, I get 1.88. 5.44 is greater than 1.88, hence why there's a mistake in the little thing there. That's what happens when you take other people's PowerPoints. There is a greater species diversity in habitat X, okay, because it's a greater number. And obviously, remember we talked about, the more diverse it's going to be is where you've got lots of different species, you want as many different species as possible, and you want each species to be evenly abundant. You want lots of each of them, okay, and evenly distributed. Whereas the other ones, there's loads of D, but very few of the other ones, okay? So it's got lower species diversity. What I'd like you to do, that's a worked example. In your computer textbook, can you make sure you have a go at the other example questions? Do the summary questions, have a go at the worked, there's a worked example there, but there'll be example questions in there as well. And at the end of the chapter, there'll be some exam style questions too. So can you make sure you get your work done on using your computer and your CGP textbook? Use the stuff that Mrs. also set you online. Any questions, please come back to me on either via the YouTube channel or communicate with me through Show My Homework. If this has been useful, thank you for watching me on My Smart Learning, and I hope to see you next time. Did I give you your high five from before? I'm glad you watched it all the way to the end, because some of you are watching at 1 minute and then disappearing. I don't know why. But anyhow, so virtual high five from me if you've watched it all to the end and you got all 5 questions right. If it's been useful, thank you very much for watching. Watch, like, subscribe if you haven't already, and share. And I'll see you next time, which will be coming close to the end of this topic. Take care. Bye.